Hola a todos, soy Javier Poveda y esto es De Bien TV, el canal donde te lo vas a pasar de bien mientras aprendes geografía, historia del arte y este año un poquito de economía y de empresariales. Este vídeo dirigido a mis alumnos de cuarto de la ESO de sección del CEIPSO en Encinar de Torrelodones. In this video, we are going to finish the study of the Unit 4, the Industrial Revolution and the Class-Based Society, Magic, with the study of the second part, the class-based society. Here you have a painting depicting the High Market Riot in Chicago, the 4th of May of 1886, which is the origin of the holiday of the 1st of May, the International Workers' Day, el Día Internacional de los Trabajadores, que no Día Internacional del Trabajo, que no es lo mismo, ojo, de los trabajadores. This was caused because of a strike a general strike in the factories of Chicago that led to a bomb exploding and several workers killed. And that's why we commemorate in the 1st of May. So let's start with the class-based society. At the end of the 18th century, a new form of social organization began to emerge, which replaced the old estates system. Remember, nobility, clergy, and third state. We studied that in the Unit 1, the Ancien Régime. In this new class-based society, people's status depended on their wealth and their job rather than on their family background. Okay, in the ancient estate system, you belong to a state depending on your birth. Okay, if you were son of a nobleman, you became a noble. Okay, and if you were a son of a peasant, you were a peasant, and until your death. But here, the status depended on your wealth and your job. We will study that. So let's go on if my PC wants to. Okay, the origins. This class-based society originated in the political and economic changes that had taken place as a result of the late 18th century revolutions. The two most important ones were the French and the Industrial Revolution, which we have already studied. Why? Because the French Revolution first abolished the privileges of the nobility and the clergy. Remember, they didn't pay tax, and now everyone paid tax, so everyone were equal. And, well, more or less equal, at least in a tributary way. And the Industrial Revolution increased the importance and power of the new privileged class, the wealthy bourgeoisie. Why? Because they were the owners of the new factories and businesses. In addition, opposed to this new social class, a new one was formed, the working class, la clase obrera, which was made up of industrial workers. Here you have a very famous painting of this new working class, Il Quarto Stato. The main feature of the new class-based society was the people's, the people's class. I was reading and I was thinking, what have I wrote here? Well, the main feature was that the people's class was determined mainly by their wealth, not by their birth as in the state system, but by their wealth. What is your wealth? Your capital, your land, your buildings, your businesses, your wages, and any other income. Therefore, society was more open, so you could you could move from one class to another. So the people's class could change depending on the wealth they possessed or obtained. So if you earn enough money or enough capital, enough wealth, you could promote to a higher class, and the other way around. So this society was divided into three groups. Well, there were two main groups, but the third one was not very important. First, the upper class, the privileges, was made up of the wealthiest people, including the wealthy bourgeoisie, which are also called the bourgeois capitalists, the bankers, the businessmen, and the factory owners, and also the nobility, which continued to receive high incomes from their agricultural holdings. Okay, these were the privileged people in this new class-based society. Then we have the middle class, which were very few people, which had a medium level of wealth and higher incomes than the working class. And it was made up of civil servants, funcionarios, lawyers, doctors, and small-scale merchants and craftsmen who owned their workshops or shops, and also by farmers who owned small agricultural holdings and cultivated their own lands. So by everybody that have any that were owners, okay, of a business or of owners of some land. And finally, the majority of the people formed the working class, which lived in extreme poverty, and it was made up of industrial workers, which are also known as the proletariat, el proletariado. They work on factories, and also the agricultural laborers, los campesinos o jornaleros, who did seasonal work and were paid by the day. That is the meaning of jornalero. Here you have the bourgeois and the workers. Oops. Here we are. So, the working class movement. First, we have to take a look at the industrial working conditions. So, as this new industrial capitalism grew, the differences between the wealthy industrial bourgeoisie and the working class increased. So, the inequality increased. For the wealthy bourgeoisie, the industrialization brought increased wealth and higher standards of living. So they became richer and richer and wealthier, and their living conditions were better and better. However, on the other hand, the working class suffered terrible working and living conditions, and here we have many features of this. Wages were a wage is a salary, were too low to support a family, so women and children had to work as well, okay? Every member of the family. The working day was extremely long and exhausting, up to 14 and 16 hours a day. So you sleep, you work, you sleep, work, you sleep, work. There was no time for leisure. Child labor in factories and mines was common. Here you have 2 children working in a spinning machine in a factory. There was a lack of safety and hygiene in the workplace, so chronic illnesses and accidents were common. As you can see here, these children have no security in this factory. So they could fall down, or even some of they could suffer injuries, and well, they were very common. The workers had no rights at all. For example, in the case of an illness, accident, or death, they lost their wages, and they could be dismissed at any time without compensation. Okay, they have no indemnization for any problem you could suffer at work. And finally, the workers did not have the right to protest or strike, hacer huelga, or even to meet and discuss their conditions. Okay? So, the difficult working and living conditions that the working class experienced led to protests against the factory owners. So there were conflict between, very soon in this new society, there was conflict between the working class and the bourgeoisie. The owners opposed workers' demands, of course, because they thought that improved conditions would reduce their profits. Okay, if you have to pay a higher wage, or you have to give some protection for the workers, so that means that the owners earned less money, so they didn't want to, of course. But despite this opposition, in the early 19th century, the proletariat in Great Britain began to organize itself in opposition to both factory owners and the government, which of course supported the factory owners. And this is the beginning of the working class movement. These first movements were the Luddites, or the Luddites, that emerged in 1811. The factory workers protested by destroying machines because they felt that they were being replaced by them. So they thought, oh, a machine is taking my job place, so let's destroy it. And many of them destroyed, for example, the looms in Great Britain. In the 1830s, the first trade unions began to appear. A trade union is an association of workers in the same industry which offer mutual assistance in the case of accident or injury and demanded better working conditions. A trade union is un sindicato. And at the same time, the Chartist movement emerged between 1838 and 1848, which was a very important movement in the early Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. The Chartists petitioned the Parliament, the British Parliament, demanding political reforms such as universal manhood suffrage, remember the liberal revolutions, and salaries for members of the parliament, the MPs. Why did they demand a salary for the members of the parliament? So they could reach that position. Why? Because the members of the parliament were not paid. So who wanted to become a member of the parliament? The owners of the privileged class, the people who already have an income. In the case a member of the parliament in the case they had a salary, the working class could reach that position. That is why they demanded a salary for that political position. A ver. Okay, these are Luddites destroying a power loom here. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. And this is net Lud. This movement is called like this, Luddites, because of a legendary character, Ned Lud, which is supposed to be the first one that destroyed a machine. And also there were some first projects. This is only for, we don't need to know this, but I tell you because I want to. Some projects which aimed to improve the conditions of the working class, and this was these ideas came from some people which are called the utopian socialists. This is a phalanster, un phalansterio, which was suggested by Charles Fourier. This is some kind of commune in which around 1,000 people worked and lived together with good conditions, by Charles Fourier. And we have Newlanark in Scotland, which is a cotton factory, and several buildings in which the workers live in better conditions. This already stands, but has become a museum, and is founded by Robert Owen. So, during the 19th century, as well as the working class movement, emerged several revolutionary ideologies emerged, and these ideologies, these revolutionary ones, promoted working class interests and aimed to transform society through a workers' revolution. A revolution is a fast and usually violent change, as we have studied, for example, in the French and American Revolution. The most important of these were Marxism and anarchism. Here you have some workers striking. So, first, we're going to study the most important one, which is Marxism. Marxism is an ideology named after Karl Marx, but it was developed by both Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And this ideology was based on their analysis of politics and economy. They predicted that the following stages would lead to a destruction of capitalism and establishment of a communist society. So Marxism predicts these following steps. First, the class struggle, la lucha de clases. The oppressed proletariat would organize themselves and struggle against their oppressors, the capitalist bourgeoisie. So, this is the class struggle. The permanent the permanent fight between two opposing classes, the bourgeoisie and the working class, the proletariat. And the objective of the proletariat was to gain political power. How? By a revolution, a violent revolution. Why violent? Because the bourgeois would not let them to seize power, of course. Then the dictatorship of the proletariat, la dictadura del proletariado. Once the proletariat have achieved political power, the working classes would establish a new social and political order, the socialist state. In this stage, the private property of the means of production would be abolished. Why? Because the means of production would be socialized. This means that will be owned by the state, owned by the collective. The state would control, plan and organize how the means of production would be used, and all economic activity would be collective, so for the profit of everyone. And finally, once this is achieved, we have the communist society. The class-based society would disappear because everybody would have the same relationship with the means of production. So there will be no owners and no workers, but everybody would own and work with the means of production. And this society would be equal and without classes. So the society without classes is the communist society, and this was theorized by both Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. How? They wrote a lot of books, but the two most important ones are the Manifesto of the Communist Party, which was published in 1848. You will, for sure, you know the beginning at the end. Spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism, that's the beginning. Un fantasma recorre Europa, el fantasma del comunismo, así comienza el manifiesto comunista. And the end, workers of the world unite, proletarios del mundo unidos. And the main book in which the communist theory is studied is The Capital, Das Kapital, a critique of political economy, which has several volumes, and the first one was published in 1867, by Karl Marx. The second revolutionary ideology, the most important one, is anarchism, which was first developed by Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, there's an O missing, and its best known advocate was Mikhail Bakunin, these two guys here. The main principles of anarchism were, first, the individual freedom. The people had to fight against any authority or institution that limited freedom. For example, the state and the church. The anarchists were opposed to the state, okay? They didn't want a state. Then the direct action. This means that each citizen should represent him or herself. So anarchists rejected political parties and elections. They did not participate in the political system, okay? They didn't have any parties and they didn't go to any election at all. They formed trade unions but not political parties. And the anarchist party does not exist. And finally, the abolition of the private property. Okay, they are socialists. The society would be organized into independent communes. Okay, the means of production would be owned collectively by every member of the commune, and the decisions would be taken by popular assemblies. Okay, instead of a state, all the communal decisions will be taken by everybody, okay, by everyone's vote. And In the second half of the 19th century, they started to organize. These revolutionary ideologies started to organize all over Europe. So the leaders of workers' organizations from various European countries began to meet at the end of the 19th century and form an organization that held everyone known as the International, La Internacional, and there were several internationals. The first international, also known as the International Working Men's Association, the IWA, was founded in London in 1864. It included trade unionists, sindicalistas, anarchistas, and Marxistas. And in 1876, the first international was dissolved due to the various disagreements between Marxists and anarchists. Okay, the main disagreement was the importance of the state and the political parties. The second international was established in Paris in 1889, and it called for an 8-hour working day instead of the 12 or 14 or 16-hour working day as we studied in the previous unit, and established the 1st of May as an international day of protest for workers' rights. Remember the Haymarket riot that I showed you at the beginning of the video? That's it. The second international only included socialist parties, so only Marxist parties were included in this second international. The anarchists were expelled. And it lasted until the beginning of the First World War in 1914. It was dissolved then because they called for not supporting this the First World War, which they proclaimed to be a bourgeois war, a war that only followed the interests of the bourgeoisie, but the workers joined the armies and they disobeyed the international, so it dissolved. And here you have a video of the Internacional, La Internacional, which is a song that became the hymn of the working class. If you want, well, this is the Spanish version, and I will sing a bit at the end. No. And finally, we have to talk a bit about the working class movement in Spain, and it developed in the second half of the 19th century. The main features were the foundation of el PSOE, Partido Socialista Obrero Español, that was established in 1879, and it was founded by Pablo Iglesias Pose, this guy here, no Pablo Iglesias Turrión, que es el Coletas, Pablo Iglesias Pose, Pablo Iglesias, in 1879, and also its trade union, its syndicate, which is la Unión General de Trabajadores, la UGT, in 1888. Both organizations, el PSOE y la UGT, they were Marxists, okay? Right now they are not, but back then they were Marxists. And the anarchists initially organized many revolutionary trade unions, such as la Federación de Trabajadores de la Región Española, la FTRE, and the anarchism was very important, well, was the main ideology in Spain during the 19th century, the end of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, especially in Catalonia and Andalusia. Why? Because Catalonia was the most industrialized region in Spain and Andalusia was the most important agricultural region in Spain. Also, in 1910, the anarchists who were opposed to the use of violence, because the anarchists were many of them came up with terrorist actions, established la Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, la CNT, which became the biggest and strongest trade union in Spain until today. Okay? La CNT sigue existiendo hoy en día, igual que la UGT, igual que el PSOE. And this is the end. Este es el restaurante Casa Labra, que está en la calle Tetuán 12, muy cerca de la Puerta del Sol, y es el restaurante en el que se fundó el Partido Socialista Obrero Español. Y además dicen que se come muy bien. Y eso es todo. Muy bien, hemos terminado con el tema 4 y no puedo más que despedirme, pues como os he prometido, lo primero con la frase de siempre, el final del manifiesto comunista: proletarios de todos los países, uníos. El manifiesto comunista es un texto brutal, buenísimo, es posiblemente el mejor análisis económico que haya hecho alguien del siglo XIX, en este caso Marx y Engels. Os lo he dejado subir a Aula Virtual, nadie se lo va a leer, pero yo ahí lo dejo. Y ya sabéis, seguidme en Instagram, cdfdisi, seguidme en Twitch de Bienstream, y os deseo feliz Navidad mientras os canto el principio de la Internacional. Arriba, parias de la tierra, en pie, famélica legión. Atruena la razón en marcha, es el fin de la opresión. El pasado hay que hacer añicos, legión esclava en pie a vencer. El mundo va a cambiar de base, los nada de hoy todo han de ser. Luego viene el estribillo, pero no vamos a alargar el vídeo innecesariamente. La letra maravillosa, por cierto, si la queréis buscar. Muchas gracias a todos por ver el vídeo y que tengáis feliz Navidad y felices fiestas. Nos vemos en el próximo.